I'm going to be showing you guys how to swap out your S13 and S14 front knuckles. We're going to be installing this Powered by Max knuckle with the Super Angle kit and 25mm roll center mod. And here's the stock one for comparison. As you can see, the ball joint taper hole has been dropped about 25mm compared to stock, and the tie rod mounting point has also been dropped a bit. And it gives you two options. First step is to remove the 30mm bolt holding the hub on to the spindle itself. What you want to do is pop this cap off with a screwdriver and a hammer, or a chisel if you have one. Just have to pry it off little by little. Next, you want to remove this 30mm bolt. You're going to need a large breaker bar. It's torqued on pretty high. Just loosen it, but don't remove it yet. Now with the steering wheel at full lock right, we're going to be removing the caliper by removing these two bolts right here. Next, remove the brake rotor and set it aside. Now we can remove the hub by unscrewing the nut. Be careful not to drop the washer that's inside here. This thing. Keep everything together like so and just set it aside. With the steering at full lock right, you can see the ball joint nut that we have to remove to disconnect the lower control arm from the knuckle. After that, we can remove the upper strut mounts and the tie rod, and that'll free it all up. We have to remove a cotter pin up here before we can attempt to remove the nut. You can't quite see it, but I have a 22mm socket on the ball joint nut and a large breaker bar to break it loose. Once it's broken loose, unscrew it about 1/4 inch, leave a little bit of space. We're gonna have to break off the taper down here. What we're gonna do now is break the taper down here from the ball joint to separate the lower control arm. What you want to use is one of these, either a pickle fork or a ball joint puller. But I don't have the ball joint puller, so this works just as well. But it destroys the boot. But since they're already destroyed, might as well use it. Alright, the ball joint's finally free after some banging. As you can see, the taper's been broken. Next step is to break the taper on the actual tie rod now. We're going to be removing this cotter pin and the nut. With the cotter pin removed, you can go ahead and remove this nut. I don't want to use the pickle fork on this, as I just bought a new rod ends and I don't want to destroy the boot. So what I'm going to do is just have the nut flush on top of the tie rod, and just with the hammer completely vertical to it, I'm just going to knock it right out. Just like that. It'll be loose without damaging the threads. Do not hammer this without a nut on it. You're going to damage the threads and you're not going to be able to get the nut back on. So only hammer when the top of the nut is flush with the tie rod. Now the next step is to remove these two bolts, which I've already loosened, so they should come out pretty quickly. Now for the nut down here on the ball joint, completely remove it. It's gonna be pretty gummed up, but if it gets stuck, just use a socket with a ratchet. Take it off. Pull the knuckle off. There you go. reinstall the knuckle, just slide in the coilover mount first, leave one bolt in, align the lower ball joint, slide it up into the hole, and put the 22mm nut on in the back. Doesn't have to be tightened all the way down, just enough to hold everything in place. And you go ahead and take your tie rod, slip it into the hole, and put the nut on. You can just leave everything loose for now. Tighten it at the end. After the tie rods are tightened, the ball joint is tightened, you can reinstall the last nut up here, the bolt, and then go ahead and install the hub. This washer goes on a certain way. It's got two flat sides, as you can see, and it matches up with the flat sides on the spindle. So go ahead and install the hub first, slide it in, then install the washer on the flat sides of the spindle, and then go ahead and install the nut. Just want to snug it on, hold the hub properly in place. We'll tighten it in a bit. Alright, now that that's on, go ahead and install the rotor. The next step is to reinstall the caliper. And go ahead and tighten those down. Now you want to go ahead and tighten up the two strut bolts right here on the knuckle.